It was a normal Saturday at the park. A little black girl laughed as her father pushed her on the swing. They had juice, snacks, and plans to go home for cartoons. But just a few feet away, a white woman watched them closely. Her smile faded. Her hand reached for her phone. And within minutes, two police cars pulled up with sirens screaming. Officers jumped out, shouting at the father to step away from the child. They didn't ask for his name. They didn't ask if she was his daughter. They just saw what they expected to see. But what happened next? No one saw coming. Because just before the cuffs could click, the man calmly reached into his jacket and pulled out something that changed everything. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one. The air at Willow Creek Park was warm that afternoon, filled with the soft rustling of leaves and the distant sound of children laughing near the playground. A tall black man named Deshaun, in his early 40s, walked slowly along the path, holding the small hand of his 7-year-old daughter, Aliyah. She wore a purple hoodie and pink sneakers and clutched a juice box in her other hand. Her hair bounced in tiny braids as she skipped beside her father, who carried her little backpack and a folded jacket over his arm. Deshaun's face was calm, peaceful, the kind of calm that only came from routine. Because this was their usual Saturday outing. They always came here. The swing set was Aliyah's favorite. They reached the swings and Deshaun knelt to help tie her shoelace, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Aliyah giggled and whispered something in his ear. He smiled, stood up, and gently pushed her on the swing, just enough for her to squeal with joy. Nearby, a white woman named Karen sat on a bench with her golden retriever lying at her feet. She wore sunglasses and a pale blue jacket, scrolling through her phone with one hand while holding the dog's leash with the other. At first, she didn't look at them, but then she noticed Deshaun, and everything about her changed. Karen stopped scrolling. Her fingers stiffened around the leash. Her eyes stayed on Deshaun too long. Her smile slowly disappeared, replaced by something colder. She tilted her head, watching as he pushed Aliyah higher. A few minutes passed before she stood up. Her expression was unreadable. She took a step forward, pretending to stretch, then another, this time walking directly toward the swings. Deshaun noticed her approaching, but stayed quiet. Aliyah was still laughing. Karen stopped a few feet away, looked at Aliyah, then at Deshaun. Her voice was soft but firm. "Is she yours?" she asked, her head slightly tilted. Deshaun nodded, confused. "Yes, why?" Karen gave a tight-lipped smile, but her eyes didn't match it. "I just wanted to be sure." She looked at the girl again, as if trying to find something wrong. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back toward her bench. Deshaun frowned, still standing behind the swing, trying to brush it off. This wasn't the first time a stranger had asked him something like that. But there was something strange in Karen's voice, something she didn't say out loud. A few moments later, he saw her again. This time she stood farther away, speaking into her phone. Her voice was hushed, but her tone sharp. "Yes, 911? I'd like to report something. There's a man at Willow Creek Park with a little girl. He's acting strange. I don't think she's his. She looks scared." Deshaun stood frozen for a second. Aliyah was still swinging, singing a tune to herself. She had no idea what was happening. He slowly walked over and stopped the swing. "Let's take a little break, sweetheart," he said quietly. She nodded and followed him toward the bench where their bags were. He sat down beside her, watching Karen from across the field. She stayed on the phone. A few other people began looking in their direction. A man with a bicycle, a mother pushing a stroller, even a teenager with headphones. They all stared for just a moment too long. The mood had shifted. Deshaun could feel it. He wasn't just a dad sitting with his daughter anymore. Now he was something else, something people were whispering about. He took out a water bottle and handed it to Aliyah, trying to keep things normal. But his eyes never left Karen. She was still watching, and she was still on the phone. Karen continued pacing near the edge of the park, her voice dropping lower as she fed more words into the phone. "He's just sitting there now, watching everyone. It doesn't look right. I really think someone needs to come check on this." She paused, nodded slightly to herself, then added, "Yes. He's black, early 40s, tall, wearing a black jacket. The girl is maybe 6 or 7. She glanced quickly over her shoulder toward Deshawn, then turned her back. To him. Deshawn sat still on the bench, one hand resting protectively on Elia's shoulder. His other hand gripped the strap of the backpack beside him. His chest rose slowly, trying to control the frustration rising inside. He had done absolutely nothing wrong. Nothing suspicious, nothing out of place. But none of that seemed to matter. Elia leaned against his arm, unaware of the tension building around them. "Daddy," she said softly, "can we go to the slides now?" He looked down at her, his face softening. "In a few minutes, sweetheart. Let's just sit for a bit." The woman with the stroller passed by a few feet away and looked at them. She smiled awkwardly, but her eyes flicked between Deshawn and his daughter, as if trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't understand. A man with a red bike stood leaning on the fence, pretending to check his phone, but clearly listening to Karen's call. Then in the distance, a sound pierced through the quiet afternoon, the low, wailing cry of a police siren. It wasn't close yet, but it was coming. Deshawn's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He took a deep breath, leaned down, and zipped up Elia's jacket. Elia looked up at him. "Are we going home?" she asked. He forced a small smile. "Soon." His voice was calm, but his eyes were scanning the park entrance. The siren was louder now. People turned their heads toward the road. Karen stood taller, phone still pressed to her ear, nodding again. "Yes, I see them," she said. "They're here." Deshawn placed the backpack gently between his feet, his hands resting on his knees. He kept his posture steady, his breathing slow. Elia leaned closer to him, confused. "Why are the police coming here?" she asked in a whisper. Deshawn paused for a second before answering. "Some people call the police for the wrong reasons, baby. But it's okay. I'm right here." The patrol car pulled up slowly near the edge of the park, tires crunching softly over the gravel. 2 officers stepped out, one older, with short gray hair and a hard face, and the other younger, with a tense but observant expression. Karen waved them over immediately, her finger pointing directly toward Deshawn and Elia. "That's them," she called. "That's the man with the little girl." Deshawn stayed seated. His hands were open, visible. He kept his eyes on the officers as they approached. Elia clutched his arm, her little fingers digging into his sleeve. The older officer stepped forward first. His voice was firm and sharp. "Sir, we need you to stand up. Step away from the child." Deshawn looked him directly in the eye. "She's my daughter," he said calmly. "You can ask her." But the officer didn't slow down. His hand hovered near his belt, close to his cuffs. "We'll figure that out. Stand up, now." Deshawn stood up slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. His hands stayed where the officers could see them. "I'm not resisting," he said in a steady voice. "But I want you to know, you're making a serious mistake." Elia stood beside him, clutching the hem of his jacket, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy?" she whispered, trembling. "What's happening?" The older officer, Officer Baines, kept his eyes locked on Deshawn. "Step away from the girl," he repeated, louder this time. The younger officer, Officer Riley, glanced briefly at Elia, then at Deshawn, then at Karen, who had now moved closer, arms crossed, watching with quiet satisfaction. "She's scared of him," Karen added quickly. "You can see it. Just look at her." "She's scared because of you," Deshawn snapped, but his voice didn't rise. He looked down at Elia and crouched slightly, keeping one hand up in the air as he spoke softly to her. "It's okay, baby. I need you to sit right here, all right? Don't move, and don't be scared. Everything's going to be all right." Elia nodded slowly and sat down on the edge of the bench, her small hands in her lap, eyes locked on her father. Officer Baines took a step closer, now directly in front of Deshawn. "Turn around," he ordered, his tone clipped. "Hands behind your back." Deshawn didn't move. "You haven't asked for ID. You haven't asked her name. You haven't asked me a single question. You just came in ready to cuff me." "You match the description from a 911 call," Baines said flatly. "Suspicious male with a minor." "And that's enough?" Deshawn asked, his voice still calm but sharper now. "You don't even know what you're walking into." Officer Riley stepped forward slightly, looking more uncertain. "Sir, if there's been a misunderstanding, we can clear it up, but we need you to cooperate." I am cooperating, Deshaun replied, but I'm not going to be humiliated in front of my daughter because someone felt uncomfortable with the way I look. Karen scoffed behind them. Why would anyone feel uncomfortable if nothing was wrong? She muttered. Deshaun turned his head just slightly. You didn't see anything wrong. You saw something you didn't expect. And now you're trying to make it fit the story in your head. Officer Baines was losing patience. This is your last warning. But before Baines could reach for his cuffs again, Deshaun said quietly, left jacket pocket. What? Riley asked. My ID, Deshaun said, locking eyes with the younger officer. You want to know who I am? Check my left jacket pocket. Do it now. Baines hesitated, but Riley took a step forward, his hand reaching into Deshaun's jacket slowly. A thin black wallet emerged. He opened it carefully, and the moment he saw what was inside, his posture changed completely. He held up the badge without a word. The gold letters gleamed under the soft sun. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Deshaun Moore. Baines stepped back immediately. His eyes darted from the badge to Deshaun's face, and for the first time, the older officer looked uncertain. Karen's mouth fell slightly open, but no words came out. The satisfaction on her face vanished. Her arms slowly dropped to her sides. The park, which had been filled with whispers and eyes watching from all directions, suddenly fell silent. The silence held like a stretched wire, thin and sharp. No one moved. Even the children on the far side of the playground seemed to pause. Riley was still holding the badge, blinking as if trying to make sense of what he had just read. FBI, he murmured under his breath. Baines looked stunned, his jaw tight, his body frozen between command and confusion. Deshaun slowly reached out, took his badge back, and slipped it into his jacket. Now, he said quietly, do you still want to arrest me? His tone wasn't angry, but it carried weight. Weight that couldn't be ignored anymore. Officer Riley stepped back, glancing at Baines as if waiting for him to speak, but Baines didn't say anything. His hand dropped away from his belt, and he took another step back. The moment of control he thought he had was gone. Karen, still standing a few feet away, finally broke her silence. I didn't know, she said, her voice suddenly smaller. Hey, you didn't look like... She stopped herself, but the damage was already done. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Deshaun turned toward her, eyes steady. Didn't look like what? A father? A professional? Or just someone who belongs here? Karen opened her mouth again, but no words came. She looked around, searching for some kind of support from the people nearby, but no one spoke. Even the man with the bike looked away. Aliyah stood slowly from the bench and walked back to her father. She didn't say anything, but her hand found his and her fingers wrapped tightly around his. Deshaun glanced down at her, then back at the officers. You came here ready to take me away in front of my daughter without asking a single real question. Do you understand what that could have done to her? What that would have done to me? Riley looked ashamed, lowering his gaze to the ground. Baines didn't respond. Karen took a step forward. I was only trying to protect the girl. You thought wrong. Deshaun cut in, his voice still low. You made a phone call that could have changed both our lives forever. And for what? Because you didn't like what you saw? Because a black man was playing with his daughter in a park? Karen shook her head slightly, but she didn't deny it. Deshaun turned back to the officers. If I didn't have that badge, what would have happened just now? His voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of knowing how easily things could have ended differently. Neither Baines nor Riley answered, because the truth hung in the air, obvious and heavy. Without that badge, things could have gone very, very wrong. The air in the park felt heavier now. The casual joy from earlier had vanished. Parents nearby gathered their children, not out of fear, but from the quiet tension that lingered. Everyone had seen enough to understand what almost happened. Deshaun stood tall, but his grip on Aliyah's hand was firmer now. She looked up at him, unsure if it was okay to speak, her innocent eyes full of questions. Officer Riley cleared his throat, trying to regain some professionalism. Sir, I apologize. We should have taken a moment to ask questions before reacting. I understand that now. His voice was soft, uncertain. Deshaun didn't respond. He just stared at Riley, watching how the young officer shifted uncomfortably in his boots. It was clear Riley hadn't come with bad intentions, but he also hadn't come prepared to challenge what he was told. Baines, on the other hand, was still silent. His arms were crossed, his mouth a tight line. He seemed to be struggling between pride and reality, holding on to the belief that his actions were justified. But even he knew deep down that something had gone wrong, something he could no longer deny. Karen stood awkwardly near the bench, her arms now folded tight across her chest. She was no longer the confident accuser. Her gaze darted between Deshawn and the officers, looking for someone to tell her that her actions were understandable, that she wasn't the one in the wrong. But no one did. "I've been coming to this park for over a year," Deshawn said, breaking the silence. "Every Saturday, same bench, same swings. My daughter loves this place. It's supposed to be safe." His voice was calm, but the pain underneath was clear. "And today, because of one phone call, I nearly got arrested. In front of her. For doing what? Helping her tie her shoes?" Aliyah looked up at him again. "Did they think you were a bad guy?" she asked softly. Deshawn hesitated. That question hurt more than anything else. He kneeled beside her, brushing her hair back gently. "No, baby. They were just confused. But Daddy's okay now." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He looked back up at the officers. "But you all need to ask yourselves, what if I hadn't been wearing my badge? What if I left it at home today, like I almost did? Would I be lying on the ground right now? Would you have handcuffed me while my daughter screamed?" Riley's mouth parted, but he couldn't answer. "You didn't ask for my ID. You didn't ask her name. You didn't ask any questions. You walked in ready to act, not to understand," Deshawn continued, standing up again. "And she," he pointed at Karen without looking at her, "decided what kind of man I was before I ever said a word." Karen took a deep breath. "I really thought something was off. She didn't look scared, but I don't know. It just didn't feel right." "You didn't know, and yet you called the police," Deshawn said flatly. "That's the problem. You saw something you didn't expect, and instead of asking a question, you imagined a story. You called in a crime that never existed. You don't get to walk away from that like nothing happened." A few bystanders were still lingering nearby, watching quietly. One man shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable," under his breath. Another woman pulled out her phone and began recording. Her camera pointed at Karen and the officers. Karen noticed the phone, her face turning slightly pale. "I wasn't trying to cause a scene," she said, trying to sound apologetic. I thought I was helping." "You didn't help," Deshawn replied. "You hurt. You don't get to be the hero in a story you invented." Riley stepped in again. "Sir, is there anything we can do to make this right?" Deshawn looked at him, long and hard. "You can start by learning to see people for who they are, not just what someone else says about them." He paused. "And you can take a full report of everything that just happened." Riley nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. We'll document everything." Deshawn nodded slowly, his jaw still clenched. "Good, because I'm not letting this disappear." Officer Riley pulled out his notepad, flipping to a clean page with shaky hands. He had handled reports before, but never one like this. Not where the suspect turned out to be a federal agent, not where the person wronged had every right to escalate it higher. He glanced at Baines, expecting him to take the lead, but the older officer remained rooted in place, his expression unreadable. Deshawn kept his tone measured as he began recounting the events. "We arrived here around 2:15. My daughter wanted to play on the swings. I tied her shoelaces, pushed her for a few minutes, then sat with her on the bench. That woman," he said, motioning toward Karen, "approached me and asked if Aliyah was my daughter. I told her yes. She said nothing else and walked away. A few minutes later, she made the call." Riley scribbled quickly, nodding after every sentence. Deshawn continued, every word clear, sharp, and full of control. "I overheard parts of the conversation. She said I was acting strange, that she didn't think the girl was mine, that she seemed uncomfortable. All of that was a lie." Karen shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't lie," she said, barely audible. "I misunderstood. You created a story that could have gotten me killed. Deshaun snapped, his voice harder now. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice. You didn't ask her name. You didn't even speak to her. You assumed the worst based on skin color and nothing else. Karen's face turned red. It's not like that. Yes, it is, he cut in. You don't get to backpedal now. Not after you put a child through this. Riley turned toward Karen. Ma'am, I'm going to need your full statement for the report. Karen hesitated. Am I in trouble? She asked, suddenly less defensive. Riley looked back at Deshaun, then back at her. That's not for me to decide, but you did make a false report that led to unnecessary use of police resources and nearly led to an arrest. So yes, this has consequences. Karen opened her mouth again, but the words wouldn't come. She looked small now. Nothing like the woman who had pointed across the field with such confidence just moments earlier. Deshaun turned toward Baines. And you? You didn't ask a single question. You looked at me, saw what she told you to see, and acted. You walked toward me like you already had a decision in your head. You reached for your cuffs before I even spoke. Is that how you treat every parent you see at a park? Baines's lips pressed into a thin line. We have to act based on the information we're given. You didn't act, Deshaun snapped. You judged. You didn't pause. You didn't verify. You didn't even talk to the child. You walked in and treated me like a threat. I'm not just someone you almost arrested. I'm someone who knows exactly how close you came to ruining my life because of someone else's fear. Riley tried to ease the moment. Sir, I'll make sure everything you say goes in the report, word for word. You do that, Deshaun replied, because when I send this up to your department's internal affairs, I don't want there to be any room for misunderstanding. I've got witnesses, I've got people filming, and I have my badge. This will not be ignored. Karen suddenly stepped forward. I didn't mean for all of this, she said quickly, her voice tight. I saw something that didn't feel right. I didn't want to risk a child's safety. You risked her safety by putting guns near her father, Deshaun said, his voice ice cold. You didn't protect anyone. You put her in danger. Elia tugged at his sleeve. Can we go home now, Daddy? Deshaun looked down at her, then gently brushed her cheek. Soon, baby, just a little longer. He looked back at Riley. I need a copy of that report when it's done, and I'll be filing my own with the Bureau. This isn't ending here. Riley nodded more respectfully now. Understood, sir. Then turning to Baines, Deshaun added, You should be the one writing this report, but I guess that would mean admitting you were wrong. Baines finally looked him in the eye. There was no apology, no excuse. Just the hollow silence of a man who knew he had lost control and had nothing left to say. The atmosphere had shifted from tense to quietly electric. Everyone could feel that something irreversible had happened. The lines between who held authority and who deserved it had been flipped upside down. Deshaun wasn't just speaking for himself now. He was standing in a place where many others had stood before, but unlike them, he had the badge, the proof that forced people to listen. Karen stepped back, her arms crossed over her chest again, but it wasn't a gesture of confidence anymore. It was defense, embarrassment, and a desperate attempt to make herself smaller. She kept looking around, noticing more people watching. A teenager was still filming on his phone from behind the tree. A mother nearby stood frozen, one hand on her child's shoulder, watching quietly. Karen tried to meet someone's eyes for support, but no one gave her that comfort. She was alone in what she had done. Deshaun adjusted his jacket, then looked at Officer Riley again. You said you want to make this right. Then don't just write a report. Make sure someone reads it. Make sure it doesn't get buried or rewritten to make anyone look better than they acted. I will, Riley said quickly. You have my word. I don't want your word, Deshaun replied. I want accountability. Officer Baines finally moved. He took one step forward and let out a slow breath. We made an error. I acknowledge that. But we responded based on a call that sounded serious. We have to take those seriously. Deshaun turned slowly to face him. You can take them seriously, but you also have to take people seriously. The moment you saw me, you didn't look for the truth. You looked for a threat. You didn't investigate. You assumed. That's not an error. That's a pattern. And it's not going away until people like you are held to the same standard you hold everyone else to. Baines didn't argue. He just looked down for a second, then turned away. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was shame. Maybe he just didn't have the energy to fight the truth anymore. Karen took a shaky breath. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't expect all of this. That's exactly the problem, Deshawn said without looking at her. You didn't expect a black father with a little girl to be normal. You didn't expect me to belong here. You didn't expect that your call would bring two armed officers ready to arrest someone. But you made the call anyway, and that tells me everything I need to know. She blinked rapidly, lips parted as if trying to find something, anything to say. I was scared, she whispered. You were scared because of your imagination, he replied, not because of my actions. The words hit harder than she expected. Karen didn't respond. She turned slightly, hugging herself, staring out toward the playground as if wishing she could disappear, into the trees beyond. Riley, still writing, glanced up. Sir, is there anyone we can contact for you? A supervisor or department contact? Deshawn reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. You can start by calling Assistant Director Nolan in Washington. You let him know exactly what happened here today. He'll be expecting my call, too. Riley took the card with both hands, his face now fully serious. He gave a respectful nod and slid the card into his notepad. Aliyah tugged at Deshawn's sleeve again. Can we go, Daddy? Her voice was quieter now, her eyes tired. She hadn't cried, but she looked like she wanted to. Her excitement from earlier was gone, replaced with something she didn't yet have the words to explain. Yes, sweetheart, he said, voice softening. We're going home. Deshawn picked up her backpack and gently placed it over her shoulders. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly, and they began walking toward the park exit. As they passed the officers, Riley stepped aside respectfully. Baines didn't move. Karen stayed frozen where she stood, arms still crossed, watching the man and child she had nearly torn apart walk away, whole, but changed. And as they disappeared from view, the weight of what had just happened stayed behind, hanging in the air like a story that wouldn't be forgotten. The gravel crunched softly beneath Deshawn's shoes as he and Aliyah walked down the path that led to the parking lot. His hand gripped hers firmly, not in fear, but in reassurance, like he needed her to feel anchored, and maybe he needed that too. The sky above them was still the same soft blue it had been when they arrived, but everything underneath it felt different now. He glanced down at Aliyah, her tiny feet stepping quickly to keep up. Her face looked quiet, but he could feel the storm behind her silence. They reached the car. Deshawn opened the door and gently helped her into the back seat. She didn't speak as he buckled her in. She just stared at her lap, hands clasped around the small stuffed animal she had brought with her. He closed the door softly, walked around, and sat behind the wheel. For a moment, he didn't start the engine. He just sat there staring at the dashboard, breathing slowly. Aliyah finally spoke. You were mad, weren't you? Deshawn turned in his seat to face her. I wasn't mad at you, baby. I was mad at what they did, at what she did. She nodded slowly. Because she thought you weren't my dad? He gave a sad smile. Yeah. She saw something and made up a story in her head. A wrong story. And instead of asking questions, she called the police. Aliyah was quiet again. But I told them. I said you were my daddy. I know, sweetheart. You did perfect. None of this was your fault. She hesitated, then said something that pierced him deeper than anything had all day. Is it because we don't look the same? Deshawn felt his chest tighten. We look the same in all the ways that matter, he said softly. But some people, they only look at skin. They don't see what's real. They don't try to understand. They just guess. And sometimes their guesses are dangerous. She didn't speak again, and he knew she was trying to understand something far too heavy for her age. She shouldn't have to understand this. Not yet. But now she had to. Because of a stranger's fear. Because of a system too quick to act and too slow to think. He started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, glancing once in the rearview mirror. Riley was still standing there, watching them leave. Baines was gone. Karen sat back on the bench, her dog curled by her feet, her posture sunken. She looked out across the playground, but her expression was blank, almost hollow. The badge hadn't just changed the ending, it had exposed the truth. and now she had to live with it. Back on the road, the radio stayed off. The silence between Deshaun and Aliyah wasn't uncomfortable. It was just full of questions, of thoughts too big to say aloud. He focused on the road ahead, but his mind was still back there, playing everything over again. The way they approached, the way his daughter's hand trembled in his, the voice that said, "Hands behind your back." His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He had trained for pressure. He had led investigations that spanned countries. He had faced threats far more dangerous than a frightened woman in a park. But this wasn't a case. This wasn't part of the job. This was personal, and it had almost spiraled into something irreversible in seconds. He pulled into the driveway of their home, parked the car, and turned to Aliyah again. "You did good today," he said gently. "You stayed strong, and you stayed brave. I'm proud of you." She looked at him and gave a small nod. "Are we still going to the zoo next weekend?" That question nearly broke him. After everything, she still wanted normal. She still believed in it, and that meant he had to protect it. "Of course we are," he said with a smile. "Nothing's going to stop that." He got out and opened her door. As she hopped down from the seat, she reached up and hugged him tightly. Her arms wrapped around his neck, and she held on longer than usual. He held her back just as long. Inside their house, everything was the same as they'd left it. Quiet, warm, filled with soft light filtering through the curtains. But to Deshaun, the house felt like more than shelter now. It felt like a boundary he had to keep intact. Because the world outside had tried to shatter something simple today. And even though it hadn't succeeded, the crack was there. He could feel it. He walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the sink staring out the window. His phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from his supervisor. "Call me when you're ready." We saw the footage, so the story was already moving. People were watching, listening. Good. It needed to be heard. Because what happened today wasn't just about him. It was about how quickly a father could become a suspect, and how close a child came to watching her world fall apart, just because someone didn't like what they saw. Later that evening, the house sat quiet. Elia had fallen asleep in her room, her small body curled up beneath her blanket, hugging the same stuffed bear she'd carried to the park. Deshaun stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her chest rise and fall. Her face was calm now, but he knew the memory of today would sit somewhere in her heart, even if she didn't understand all of it yet. He closed her door gently and walked down the hall, loosening the knot in his tie as he stepped into the dimly lit living room. His wife, Amina, sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, laptop open, phone in her hand. She looked up as he entered, her eyes scanning his face. "I saw the video," she said quietly. "Someone posted it already. It's everywhere." Deshaun dropped onto the couch beside her and rubbed his hands over his face. "I figured it would be." His voice was low, heavy, and it should be. Amina set the laptop aside and leaned closer. "I don't need to ask if you're okay, because I can see you're not." "I'm fine," he said, though even he didn't believe it. "No, you're not," she said gently. "You're angry. You're tired. And you're carrying something you shouldn't have to." Deshaun didn't respond right away. He leaned back into the couch, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. She just pointed, said something felt off, and that was enough. That's all it took for them to come in, ready to put cuffs on me. "She didn't even know your name." "She didn't care about my name," he muttered. "She didn't care about the truth. She just saw a black man with a child and decided it didn't add up." Amina reached for his hand. "And if you weren't FBI?" Deshaun laughed bitterly. "Then this conversation would be happening in a precinct holding cell, or not at all." Silence fell between them, not the kind born from tension, but from shared understanding. They had talked about this before, not this exact moment, but the possibility of it. The unspoken reality that for all of Deshaun's training, service, and rank, it only took one stranger's fear to bring him to his knees. After a while, Amina spoke again. "Are you going to file the report?" "I already started it," he replied. "Internal Affairs will get it in the morning. I've listed everything, every word, every step they took." Riley wasn't the problem. He was green. He hesitated. That hesitation might have saved me. But Baines? He was ready to finish it. He didn't care who I was. He saw what she saw, and that was enough. Do you think anything will happen to him? I don't know, Deshawn said. But this time there's footage. There are witnesses. There's pressure. Amina nodded, but she didn't look convinced. People still forget. The outrage fades. Then it happens again. I know, he said quietly. That's the part that stays with me. This isn't new. It's just recorded now. He stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The street outside was still, the occasional car passing under the amber glow of the street lamp. Their neighborhood had always been quiet, safe, but today reminded him that safety wasn't something guaranteed. Not even for a federal agent with a badge and a child by his side. Amina came to stand beside him. She's sleeping peacefully, you know, she said. But it's not fair that she has to ask questions like that. Not at her age. Deshawn turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and something sharper. Resolve. She asked if we looked the same, he whispered. Can you believe that? She thought maybe that was the reason. Amina covered her mouth. Oh my God. She's 7. She shouldn't be thinking about skin color. She should be worried about snack time and cartoons. She will, Amina said firmly, because we'll keep protecting. That for her. He nodded. Yeah, but we also have to prepare her. I used to think I'd wait until she was older. Now I know I can't. They stood in silence, side by side, the curtain still slightly pulled back as they looked out over their quiet street. The world beyond their window hadn't changed, but their view of it had. Deshawn finally dropped the curtain and stepped away. I have to call the bureau. Director Nolan's office already reached out. Do what you need to do, Amina said, but take care of yourself too. He looked at her, his eyes softer now. I will. And as he walked toward his study, ready to turn this day into something no one could ignore or erase, he carried the weight of what almost happened, not just for himself, but for every person who didn't have a badge in their pocket or a camera watching when everything could have gone wrong. The study was quiet, its shelves lined with case files, awards, and framed commendations, reminders of a long, decorated career. Deshawn sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and began typing. His fingers moved slowly at first, then faster as the memory of the day poured into each word. This wasn't just another report. This wasn't like the field notes he'd written after stakeouts or raids. This was personal. This was a father documenting how close he came to being mistaken for a criminal, how close his daughter came to seeing her hero turned into a suspect. He typed every detail with precision. The time they arrived at the park, the swing, the shoelace, the way Karen looked at him, suspicious, unsure, but certain enough to call 911. He described her words, quoted her tone, the exact phrasing he remembered from the call she made while standing not 30 feet away from him. He wrote about the officers, Riley's hesitation, Baines's command, the way the cuffs had glinted in the sunlight as Baines moved to arrest him without a single question asked. He detailed his words, his warnings, the moment he told them where his badge was, the silence that followed, the shift in the park when the truth came out, the invisible wall that collapsed not because justice had worked, but because power had shifted. When he reached the part about Aliyah asking why they didn't look the same, he stopped typing. He stared at the blinking cursor for nearly a full minute. His chest rose and fell with a slow breath. He didn't want to write that line, but he knew he had to. That single question captured what couldn't be undone. The innocence lost, the seed planted. He wrote it out exactly how she said it. Is it because we don't look the same? Then below it, he added a note for the record. This was the first time my daughter questioned if she belonged to me because of how the world reacted to our skin. That damage will not fade with an apology. He continued typing late into the evening, including every witness account, every person who had watched without speaking, every stranger who turned their child away as if danger lingered near him. It wasn't just about Karen. It wasn't just about Baines. It was about the pattern, the automatic suspicion, the way a man could serve his country, wear a badge, protect lives, and still be seen as a threat with his own child in public. When he finished, he didn't feel relief. He didn't feel justice. He felt tired. Tired in a way no sleep could fix. He attached the report and sent it directly to Assistant Director Nolan with a short message. Full report attached. Recommend immediate review and internal inquiry regarding Baines. Please acknowledge receipt. S.A. Moore. The email sent with a soft chime. Deshaun leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, letting the weight of the day settle. But just as he began to stand, his phone buzzed on the desk. A new message. Unknown. Number. Saw what happened. I work for the mayor's office. You're not the only one this has happened to. If you're ready to speak publicly, we're listening. He stared at the message for a moment, then another buzz. This time a message from his old friend in Washington, an attorney he'd trained with years ago. James H. Just saw the video. It's blowing up. If you want to push this forward, you've got people backing you. Let me know. We can make this bigger. Deshaun felt a mix of emotions: anger, exhaustion, pride, and something else. Responsibility. Because it was no longer just about what happened to him. It was about every father who didn't have a badge to flash. Every child who watched their parent be treated like a stranger. Every woman who thought a phone call could rewrite someone's reality. He picked up his phone, thought about calling James, then paused. He needed to think. He needed to be sure. Because once he stepped into the public light, there would be no turning back. But as he stood at the window, looking out into the quiet night, he already knew the answer. This wasn't ending in a police report. Not this time. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the slats of the blinds, casting thin golden lines across the hardwood floor. Deshaun sat at the dining table with a cup of coffee untouched in front of him. The house was still quiet. Elia was still asleep, and Amina moved silently around the kitchen, preparing breakfast with her usual care. But even the clink of spoons and the hum of the fridge couldn't break through the thick silence between them. They had both slept, but the weight of the day before had followed them into the morning. Deshaun's phone lit up with notification after notification. Overnight, the video from the park had spread like wildfire. Social media platforms were flooded with the footage. Karen's finger pointing, Deshaun calmly identifying himself, Riley pulling out the FBI badge, and the quiet moment of collective embarrassment that followed. But what made it spread wasn't just the confrontation. It was the way he had stood there, calm, composed, holding his daughter's hand while the system nearly failed them both. He scrolled through the posts, thousands of comments, some from strangers offering support, others from people who shared similar stories: fathers mistaken for kidnappers, mothers questioned in stores, children pulled aside by strangers who just wanted to make sure. It was overwhelming. Amina walked over, set a plate in front of him, and sat down with her own coffee. "It's everywhere," she said softly. "News outlets, blogs. Someone even wrote an op-ed about it last night. They're calling you the father with the badge." Deshaun gave a tired half smile. "Great, I always wanted a nickname." "I think it means something," she said. "The way you handled it, the way you spoke. People saw that." He looked at her. "I didn't do it to be seen." "I know," she said, "but you were. And now people are paying attention." His phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He didn't answer, but he read the message. City news anchor. "Mr. Moore, we'd love to feature your story on tonight's program. Would you consider an interview?" He stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard, then locked the phone and set it face down. "They want to make it a story, but for me it's not a headline. It's a bruise that hasn't even faded yet." Amina reached across the table and held his hand. "Then tell your version of it, before someone else turns it into what they want it to be." He nodded slowly. Then the doorbell rang. They both looked toward the front hallway. It was still early. Deshaun stood up cautiously, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. A uniformed officer stood outside, clean-shaven, young, holding a manila envelope. Deshaun opened the door slowly. "Can I help you?" The officer removed his cap. "Special Agent Moore?" "Yes. I'm Officer Delgado. I was asked to hand-deliver this from the Internal Review Board. It's regarding the incident at Willow Creek Park." Deshaun took the envelope, nodding. "Thank you." The officer hesitated. "For what it's worth, sir, I saw the video. I'm sorry for what happened. It shouldn't have gone that way." Deshaun didn't reply right away. He just nodded. "Appreciate it." He closed the door, walked back to the dining table, and sat down. Amina watched him carefully. "What is it?" He opened the envelope. Inside were two documents. The first was a formal notice of internal investigation. Sergeant Edward Baines has been placed on administrative leave pending a full inquiry into the incident involving Special Agent Moore. The second was a handwritten note on department letterhead. "Agent Moore, we owe you and your daughter an apology. What happened was not just a failure of judgment. It was a failure of trust, of process, and of human decency. We are committed to ensuring this will not happen again." Deputy Chief Halverson. He handed the note to Amina, who read it slowly. "That's something," she said. "But it's not enough, is it?" Deshaun shook his head. Because apologies don't undo damage. They don't erase the fear my daughter felt. They don't fix the part where, for a few minutes, I stopped being her dad and became someone the world saw as dangerous." He folded the papers and slid them back into the envelope. His mind raced, not with anger, but with clarity. The truth had come out. The system had responded, but barely. And the only reason it had responded at all was because he had a badge, a title, a reputation. If any of those things were missing, the day would have ended differently. His phone buzzed again. This time it was James, the attorney from D.C. "James H. Just spoke to the local chapter of the Civil Rights Legal Fund. They want to help. You've started something, D, and people are watching." Deshaun looked at the message for a long time. He had never wanted to become a symbol. He just wanted to buy his daughter a juice, push her on the swing, and let her laugh like every other child. But now the story was bigger than him, bigger than Karen, bigger than Baines. It was about visibility, about truth, about making sure the next father didn't need a badge to prove he belonged. Deshaun stood from the table, walked to the hallway mirror, and stared at his reflection. "I didn't ask for this," he said aloud, "but I'm not walking away from it either." By noon, Deshaun had made his decision. The video wasn't just going viral, it had become a national conversation. His inbox was full of interview requests, legal support offers, even invitations to speak at forums and town halls. Every message carried the same theme. "This happens too often. You handled it with strength. Please don't let it die here." He sat again at his desk, staring at the same video clip playing on a loop. His voice, Karen's finger, Elias sitting frozen on the swing, clutching the chain, Baines with his hand hovering over the cuffs. And then the pause, the shift, the moment his badge appeared, and everything changed. He watched it 10 times, not because he liked reliving it, but because he needed to feel what the world had seen. He needed to understand why it struck so deeply. Then he picked up the phone and called James. "You ready?" James asked without a greeting. "I think I have to be." "Good," James replied, "because this is already out of your hands. It's bigger than your name now. It's about what your name represents. We can do this right. No rage, no noise, just truth. We can show them what this really means." Deshaun sighed. "I didn't expect to be a symbol, James." "None of us do," James said. "But sometimes the story chooses you. You're not just telling your truth. You're giving voice to people who haven't been believed." They spent the next hour discussing legal steps, media guidelines, and how to make sure the story wouldn't be twisted, diluted, or taken out of his control. By the time the call ended, Deshaun had agreed to appear on one primetime news segment and to speak at a community roundtable the following weekend. His name was already trending. His face was already circulating. There was no use hiding from it. Amina entered the study quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. She placed one on his desk and sat in the chair across from him. "You sure you're ready for all of this?" she asked. "I'm sure I don't have a choice anymore," he answered. "If I don't say something, someone else will speak for me." She nodded. "You'll do it right." Deshaun looked down at his hands, hands trained for defense, for duty, for protection. Yesterday, those same hands were almost forced behind his back while his daughter watched. No gun drawn, no crime committed. Just the wrong look, the wrong assumption, in the wrong moment. He shook his head. "Do you know how fast it happened, Amina? I've trained for emergencies. I've led hostage rescues. But nothing prepares you for how quickly someone can decide you don't belong." Amina reached across the desk and took his hand. "I do know, because I've lived it too. In stores, in airports, Even at school pickup lines. We've just learned to swallow it. But Alaya, she hasn't. And now it's in her world. That was the part that struck deepest. Not what had happened to him, but what it had done to her. That afternoon, Deshawn picked up Alaya from her nap and took her for a drive. She sat in the back seat, legs swinging, eyes sleepy. They stopped for ice cream, just the two of them. He let her pick the flavor. She chose rainbow swirl. As they sat on a bench outside the shop, her ice cream dripping onto her shirt, she asked quietly, "Are the police still mad at you?" Deshawn looked at her. "No, sweetheart. They weren't mad. They were confused. Because of that lady? Because of how the world sometimes sees people like me?" he said, trying to choose his words. "Some people are afraid of things they don't understand." Alaya licked her spoon. "That's silly," he smiled. "Yeah, it is." She leaned her head on his arm. "You're my daddy. You're the same every day." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "And I always will be." They sat like that until her ice cream melted down to the cone. He didn't want to ruin that moment. He didn't want her to feel the weight of what she didn't yet fully know. But he also understood now that he had to start preparing her, not for fear, but for awareness, for strength, for the day she would no longer be a little girl on a swing, but a young woman who might face the same gaze from someone like Karen. That evening, after they got home, Deshawn sat on the edge of his bed scrolling through his messages one last time. Then he typed a short post, paused, and hit publish. "Yesterday I went to the park with my daughter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break a law. I pushed her on the swing and helped her tie her shoe. And someone still saw me as a threat. This isn't about one person's fear. It's about a system of assumptions. I won't let this go quiet. Not for me. Not for her." Within minutes, the post had thousands of shares. But Deshawn didn't check the numbers. He didn't care about going viral. He only cared that, this time, the silence had been broken by his own voice. The following day brought the first media request he agreed to face in person. It was a local news channel, one that had built a reputation for fair reporting and had covered previous cases of racial bias with care. Deshawn didn't want a circus. He didn't want a parade of microphones and flashing lights outside his home. He wanted clarity. He wanted truth, stripped of dramatics and agendas. Amina agreed to come with him, not to speak, but to be there, as his anchor, his constant. The studio was modest, quiet, the lights low and focused. The reporter, a seasoned journalist named Nathan Razi, met Deshawn with a firm handshake and a nod of respect. "We won't cut your words," Nathan said. "You have full say. This isn't about spinning a story. It's about sharing it right." Deshawn nodded, appreciating the professionalism. He sat in the chair, straight-backed, with the same calm he had shown at the park, but his eyes held something deeper now, a weariness mixed with fire. A man who had carried too much for too long and now knew the weight could no longer be hidden. The camera began recording, and Nathan spoke softly. "Special Agent Moore, thank you for being here. I want to start with a simple question. What went through your mind when you realized you were being approached as a suspect, not a father?" Deshawn paused. He didn't rush. Every word had to matter. "I thought about my daughter," he said finally. "I thought about how I needed to keep calm because if I didn't, that situation could have gone bad. Fast. I wasn't scared for myself. I was scared of what it would do to her. The look in her eyes when she heard those sirens, that's going to stay with me forever." Nathan nodded, listening intently. "And what about the woman who made the call?" "She didn't know me, but she thought she did," Deshawn said. "She built a whole narrative around something that didn't feel right to her. Not because I did anything wrong, not because my daughter looked upset, but because we didn't fit the picture she had in her head of what a father and daughter look like." The interviewer let a moment pass before asking, "Did you ever think about walking away? From the public attention, the media, the pressure?" Deshawn gave a short breath. "Of course. I'm a private man. I've spent most of my life trying not to be noticed. I do my job, I protect people, and I go home. But this time, I couldn't walk away, because this wasn't just about me. It was about every dad who's been stared at too long in a park, every mother who's been followed in a grocery store, every kid who's learned too early that their safety can be questioned because of the way their family looks." The conversation continued, clear, grounded, powerful. Deshaun didn't raise his voice once, but every sentence struck with quiet force. When the interview aired later that evening, it wasn't just shared, it was felt. Messages poured in from around the country, from teachers, lawyers, officers, even strangers who admitted they had made similar assumptions in the past and now couldn't stop thinking about what that must have felt like for him and his daughter. The next morning, Amina handed him her phone while he sipped his coffee. "You need to see this," she said. It was a video, different from the one at the park. This one was from Karen. She had recorded herself, sitting alone on a patio, visibly shaken. Her voice trembled. "My name is Karen Whitmore. I was the woman at the park that day, and I've seen the footage. I've read the comments. I've seen myself through someone else's eyes for the first time. I'm not going to make excuses. I saw a black man with a young girl, and I assumed something was wrong. I called the police because I thought I was being cautious. But what I did was dangerous. What I did was rooted in fear, not fact. I've apologized privately, but I want to say this publicly. I was wrong, and I will carry that for the rest of my life." Deshaun watched the whole thing in silence. When it ended, he placed the phone face down. Amina looked at him. "Do you believe her?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "I believe she regrets it. I'm not sure she understands all of it yet, but maybe that's a start." That day, he walked Aliyah to school. She held his hand, humming softly, her lunchbox swinging at her side. When they reached the front steps, she looked up at him and said, "I told my teacher you were on TV. She said you're very brave." Deshaun smiled. "You think so?" She nodded. "Because you didn't yell. You didn't run. You just stood there. You stood like a superhero." He crouched beside her, kissed her forehead, and said, "That's because I had someone very special to protect." And as he watched her walk into the school building, her braids bouncing with each step, Deshaun felt something shift. Not the world, not yet, but something within him. A calm that came not from being seen, but from finally being heard. The days that followed brought more attention than Deshaun had ever experienced in his entire career. Headlines didn't just report what happened. They named it. FBI agent mistaken for threat while with daughter in public park. When fatherhood looks suspicious, one badge, two stories, a nation watching. The narrative had outgrown a single incident. It was now a mirror held up to a country wrestling with the quiet, everyday decisions that too often turn deadly for people who look like him. And yet, Deshaun remained composed. He didn't chase the spotlight. He didn't lash out. He declined talk shows that wanted a dramatic breakdown and refused interviews where producers pushed him to talk about anger more than accountability. He knew what the media wanted, but he also knew what the truth needed. His words weren't for show. They were for impact. One morning, as he sat reading emails, a letter arrived. A white envelope, hand-addressed, no return name. He opened it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper, written in neat handwriting. He read it slowly. "Dear Mr. Moore, my name is Michael. I'm 14. I watched the video with my mom. I'm mixed. My dad is black, and I'm light-skinned. Sometimes when we're out together, people stare at us too. One time someone asked if he was my uncle. I didn't know what to say. I just remember feeling weird and wrong, like I didn't belong to him. But when I saw what happened to you, I realized it's not our fault. It's how people see things. I just wanted to say thank you for standing up. I showed your video to my friends at school. Now they understand better too. You made me feel proud of who I am. Thank you." Michael H. Deshaun sat there for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. This, more than any headline, more than any apology, was the reason he hadn't stayed silent. A boy who found comfort in knowing he wasn't alone, that his truth was real, that his father deserved to be seen too. He carefully folded the letter and placed it in his drawer. That evening, he met with community leaders in the city, teachers, faith leaders, local police supervisors, civil rights advocates. They all came together in a town hall to talk about how quickly the wrong assumption could become a crisis. Deshaun was the final speaker of the night. When he stepped up to the podium, the room went quiet. He looked across the crowd. So many faces, So many people who carried their own stories. His voice didn't rise above a firm, steady tone. Most people think the worst thing you can lose is your freedom. But for me, the worst thing I almost lost was my daughter's trust in the world. She didn't see a man on the swing that day. She saw her dad, her protector, her safe place. And in a single moment, someone else decided that wasn't enough. Someone else decided I was dangerous. He paused, letting the words settle. I didn't come here today to condemn. I came here to ask something simple. Look again. Before you call, before you point, before you assume, look again, because that man you're afraid of might just be someone's father. That child you think looks different might just be with the only person who truly knows how to protect them. He told them about the badge, about how it changed the outcome, about how, without it, the story could have ended very differently. And the sad part is, it wasn't my words that stopped them. It wasn't the truth. It was that badge, that title. That's what gave me the right to stay standing. But what about the man without it? The one who works double shifts, who wears coveralls instead of a blazer, who takes his kid to the park because that's the only time they get together? Who protects him? The room was still. Some people nodded. Others wiped their eyes. He closed his notes. I don't want to be remembered because I was an FBI agent who avoided an arrest. I want to be remembered because I was a father who spoke up when the world expected him to stay quiet. My daughter deserves that. Your children deserve that. You do too. As he stepped down from the stage, people stood, not out of obligation, but because something in his words had moved them, not with outrage, but with understanding. Later that night, after he returned home and Aliyah was tucked into bed, Deshaun sat once again in the quiet of his study. He turned off his phone, closed his laptop, and allowed himself one moment of stillness. He thought about every man who had looked like him and hadn't been so lucky. He thought about the boy who wrote the letter, and he thought about his daughter swinging in that park, laughing under the sun, before the world tried to take that moment from her. He wouldn't let them. Not now. Not ever. A month had passed since the incident at Willow Creek Park, but the memory remained vivid, etched into Deshaun's life like a scar that no one else could see, but everyone had heard about. The story had completed its viral cycle. Media attention had slowed, the headlines had moved on to new crises, and online outrage had scattered into newer trends. But for Deshaun and his family, the impact was still very much alive. Every now and then, strangers still recognized him in grocery stores or coffee shops. They'd nod respectfully, sometimes whisper a quiet "thank you" before walking off. It wasn't fame, it was something deeper, something more solemn. A shared understanding between people who knew how quickly silence could cost someone everything. At home, things had settled back into their usual rhythm. Aliyah had returned to her joyful self, playing in the yard, begging for ice cream, asking the same question every night. Can we go to the park tomorrow? And each time Deshaun smiled and said, soon. He had waited for the noise to fade, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted to return with strength on his own terms. He wanted to walk back into that park, not as a man afraid of being watched, but as a father reclaiming what had been taken from him. On a bright Saturday morning, Deshaun rose early. He packed a small bag with juice, sandwiches, a book for Aliyah, and her favorite sun hat. He stepped into her room, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Wake up, baby girl. We've got somewhere to go." Aliyah opened her eyes slowly. When she realized what he meant, her face lit up. "We're going to the park?" He nodded. "Yeah, we're going back." Amina stood by the door, watching them get ready. She didn't say much, just handed him Aliyah's sunscreen and smiled with quiet pride. "Go be seen," she said softly, "by the right people, for the right reasons." The ride to Willow Creek Park was calm. The trees lining the road were beginning to bloom again, soft pink blossoms swaying gently in the wind. As they pulled into the parking lot, Deshaun noticed something he hadn't expected. A small group of families scattered across the lawn, more than usual for this time of morning. A few familiar faces from the town hall were there, others he didn't recognize. A subtle nod here, a smile there. No cameras, no press, just people, watching, waiting. He and Elia stepped out of the car. She ran ahead, laughing as she always did, racing toward the swing set with pure joy. Deshaun followed, slower, taking in every detail. The park bench, the playground fence, the grass still patchy near the edges of the walkway. Everything looked the same, but it all felt different now. He reached the swing and pushed her gently, just like that day. She squealed and threw her legs forward, her laughter ringing through the park. It was a sound that had almost been silenced, and now it was stronger than ever. One of the parents from the community group walked by. He paused near Deshaun and said in a low voice, "Glad to see you here." Deshaun nodded. "It was time," the man smiled. "A few of us come here more often now. Not because we're scared, but because we understand now. We see differently." Deshaun said nothing. He didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. After a while, Elia grew tired and sat beside her father on the grass. "You're not mad anymore, are you?" she asked, picking at the clovers beside her shoe. "I was never mad at you," he said, brushing a curl from her forehead. "I was mad that someone tried to take this moment from us, but we took it back. Does that mean we can come here every weekend again?" He looked out across the park. A group of kids played tag near the trees. A white mother chased after her toddler while a black father helped his son learn to ride a bike. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, every weekend." They stayed until the sky turned orange and the sun began its slow descent behind the tree line. On the way home, Elia fell asleep in the back seat, her head tilted, mouth slightly open, arms cradling her stuffed bear. Deshaun glanced at her in the mirror, then focused on the road ahead. There were no sirens behind him, no eyes watching with suspicion, just the soft hum of the tires and the gentle sound of his daughter's breathing. When they arrived home, he carried her inside, tucked her into bed, and stood there for a long moment, watching her sleep, peaceful, untouched by fear. Then he walked to his study and opened a folder labeled "Park Incident," closed. Inside was the original report, the apology from the department, the letters, the photos from the town hall. He added one more thing, a printed photo of that morning's park visit. Elia on the swing, arms out, eyes closed, smiling toward the sky. He slid the photo into the front of the folder, closed it, and locked the drawer. The story hadn't ended in violence. It hadn't ended in silence. It had ended in truth, accountability, and the reclaiming of something small, but sacred. A simple swing on a Saturday morning. Deshaun leaned back in his chair, the house quiet around him, and let himself finally breathe. Not because it was over, but because they had made it through. Still standing, still whole, still free. And sometimes that was enough. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss what's coming next.